Hi, I'm Paul Duchesne. Welcome to Mama Paul's Video Podcast. Today's going to be part one of a series of shows I'm going to do. I'm going to do a series of shows about New York City and my life in New York City. This one is going to be centered around Soho, which I have written in back of me. The word Soho, meaning south of Houston. It's an area in New York which you undoubtedly heard of before because of its artistic relevance at this point in time. But when the story takes place, there wasn't a lot of artistic relevance to Soho. I was brought up, and I've talked about this in the past, I was brought up in what I describe as a cocktail lounge kid in New York. My father owned a bar on Central Park South, off 7th Avenue, which is right in the middle of Central Park at the lower end of, the north end of Broadway, the south end of the park. The Plaza Hotel is 2 blocks away, and Columbus Circle is on the other side, a block away. Theater District is right below us, and in fact, there was a theater which had been a Broadway theater, then became a TV studio right next to the bar. When my father bought the bar that he had worked in for a number of years, he goes into partnership with this guy Joe, who's connected to the mob, and when he signs the papers, he suddenly finds out we're in bed with the mob, which we are in for the next few years. This leads to a whole other segment in my life story. So all this period of time, we're paying off the cops and the mob, because the cops and the mob are a symbiotic relationship. And I sort of have described this as a Carnegie Hall culture of corruption. So anyway, here we are at the bar. I grew up there. I graduated from high school, and I've always wanted to be in school in Greenwich Village. And at the last minute, I'm forced into school in Greenwich Village, and that's a whole other story. But I wind up going to NYU, which I really couldn't afford to be in. So I'm going to NYU, downtown Manhattan. I'm taking classes from 8 to noon. I'm then going uptown and working at Albert's Hosiery every day from noon to 5. I'm then going back downtown at night for night classes. So I'm going to school in the morning and night, working in between, not a lot of time for studying. I used to get on the subway at night and come home, and I'd fall asleep on the way home. I've got, the wife is at home, 2 kids, and I'm working at AT&T on the west side, going to school on the east side, and on the weekend sometimes I'd either be driving a cab or for a period of time also loading trucks in Brooklyn. So I'm pretty busy most of the time. I hardly have any breathing space. Well, there's one night I'm finishing school up and I get approached by some people about going to a party downtown. Well, I'm working a midnight shift, I believe, at the phone company at this time. So I think, well, I've got a 3-hour window. Maybe I'll go downtown with you for the party. Instead of studying, I'll go to the party. Not a smart idea, but I do it anyway. I'm not that bright a guy when I'm in my 20s. Committed, but not bright. So I go down with them to the party. Well, where's the party going to be? It's, someplace south of Houston Street. And like, south of Houston? What the heck is south of Houston? Now, I knew Houston Street because I used to hang out in Greenwich Village, and I knew Houston Street was the south end of the village, and that's as close as I ever got to it. Except for every September, we used to go to a festival at the Gennaro Festival. And it was in mid-September every year, and it was in sort of on the edge, it was in Little Italy as far as I knew. I'm going to swing over to this map here for a second. I've got 2 maps in back of me. This is an official map of New York City. You'll notice here's 14th Street. Everything north of 14th Street is a grid. It's literally like grid paper. All the avenues are coming down, north and south are coming down, and all these streets going east and west. It's a perfect grid. It's very easy direction-wise and geographically to drive around Manhattan until you get down to 14th Street. And once you get down to 14th Street, if you'll notice over here, these streets are going all sorts of different directions and circles and all sorts of things. Now, south of 14th Street is much more like a little city in Europe. So I made a little chart of this over here so I can point some things out. So here's 14. Here's Greenwich Village. Here's the East Village over here, which isn't as chic as Greenwich Village. And south of Houston Street, you've got the Lower East Side over here, Little Italy, Chinatown, and Wall Street down here. Now, Wall Street, for sure, is big, tall buildings down here, and that's where the stock exchange is. North of 14th Street, big, tall buildings over here. This area here is much smaller density. Much smaller density. It's more livable. More livable. Now, these are all less expensive areas to live, except maybe right around parts of the village, but way less expensive than the rest of the residentials up here. This is the Upper East. This is the Upper East Side, the Upper West Side. The Upper West Side were more of your NYU, Columbia students and teachers and people like that. And the richest of the Richie Rich are on the East Side. John Lennon is over here, and a lot of interesting people are on the West Side, but the Richie Riches are over here on the East Side. But there's a symbiotic relationship between all these neighborhoods that are dependent on this blank area right here. What the heck's going on here? This is what became known in 1962 as Soho. So anyway, earlier than that, we went to this San Gennaro festival, which is right off Houston Street in Little Italy, right next to, like literally you could spit and be in what became Soho. This is a Little Italy, the Italian church over there on the corner. The San Gennaro festival every year was in mid-September, and my wife and I would go down there, Diane and I would go down there, and you'd get there late. You did everything in New York late. You'd get down there 9, 10 o'clock at night, and it was one full city block, and there were all these food vendors on the block, food vendors right and left, a little music here and there. The church is at the corner, and games, wheels to bet on, and the kind of games and things that they used to play at all these church bazaars back in the 50s and 60s. Well, about 10 o'clock at night, they would start to put the grills on with the meat and the pork sausages. Well, this is Friday, Catholic San Gennaro festival, but you don't eat meat on Friday in the Catholic Church in the 60s. You ate after midnight. They would put the grills on, and the pork would start, with the fat, would start emanating out of these grills. Grills, like every second or third booth would have a food grill. Well, the air was dripping with pork fat and beef fat. The smells would just intoxicate your nostrils. You could practically feel the fat on your face. And by the time within 20 minutes, you were like, oh, when are we going to eat around here? You know, I've had enough of this fluff food. I want a sausage sandwich. So at midnight, bam, all hell broke loose, and that's when the booth really started selling food like you wouldn't believe. And you'd eat like a king for the next hour or so. And the festival didn't end till God knows when, 2, 3, 4 in the morning. The bars in Manhattan used to close at 4 in the morning, so you could any kind of thing went pretty late in New York. Well, all of these booths, they paid a fee to have a booth there. Well, I knew that the mob was getting money for the booths. My father was paying off the cops and the mob in his little bar uptown. I knew about this relationship, what I called the Carnegie Hall culture of corruption, the relationship between the cops and the mob. Well, downtown, you could see directly the relationship between the mob and the church. Another marvelous institution. So the mob was taking the biggest cut of the money that people were paying to get a booth on the street there for the festival. Well, at the end of the festival, people would leave, or during the festival, and a heartfelt donation they would make to the church. And they would make this donation, they took the gate down so people could walk in and do it. And you'd take out a $1 bill or a $5 bill or maybe a $10 or maybe even a $20 bill, and you put it on the statue. So by the end of the night, the statue is loaded with all this money. Well, I'd been to the festival for 2, 3, 4 years in a row, and I knew that the mob was making money on the booths. Well, suddenly there's an article in the New York Times the next day, the mob is also getting the money that's on the statue. They're literally, at the end of the festival, they're taking the money off the statue and it's going into their pockets. I couldn't believe it. I absolutely couldn't believe it. It was just flabbergasting. These guys are so sleazy. I've always sort of, after my experiences in my father's bar when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, I had this sense that they would literally practically run their mother over if they could make more than 5% on the deal. Now, I don't know if they'd actually run their mother over, but pretty close to it. They'd run anybody over if they could make more than 5% on the deal, no doubt about it. And it's exemplified by this gangster, orange-headed Goomba that we've had in the White House for 4 years, who's still running around now, threatening people with violence right and left. So anyway, that was my experience up till that point with the Soho area. I didn't even know it was there. Never even heard of it. Who would go down there? There was nothing there to go to. The Bowery even the Bowery. The Bowery over it was in between the Lower East Side and Little Italy, was the Bowery area, and that area I was real familiar with because my father would go down. It was where the restaurant supply houses were. So when I was 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, we would go down to the Bowery if he needed glasses or silverware or plates or something like this for the restaurant. So I was exposed early on to the underbelly of Manhattan, and the Bowery was definitely the underbelly of Manhattan. On a comic level, there were the Bowery Boys, which was a series of movies made with this cute gang of kids who ran around, and they were sort of Lower East Side kids who hung out in the Bowery. Well, the real underbelly of the Bowery were known as the Bowery Bums, and Bowery Bums were literally the alcoholics who were in flop houses or on the street all throughout this area. And I would see them as we went down there. They were there. And these Bowery Bums might have been an Episcopal minister the year before who things started to go south and he winds up with his head in a bottle downtown in the Bowery. In fact, a few years later, there were periods when these creepy kids from Little Italy would go into the Bowery and set Bowery Bums on fire. One of the worst things I could not believe that these kids, they were literally putting lighter fluid and setting some people on fire. And that's when you found out that the guy that you thought was this bum had been an upscale minister the year before. That was the first one they wound up doing. It didn't happen too many times, but it happened enough times to stick in my mind the kind of crap that went on down there. The other thing I saw these guys literally, I saw this myself, literally pouring rubbing alcohol through a sock in order to filter it, to make it a little bit cleaner to drink. And the ultimate was most of your alcoholics had the shakes. So what they would do is, let's say they had a shot glass here. I'll say that's a shot glass, and they wanted to get a drink in. Well, they would put a handkerchief or something over them. They would grab the shot glass and they would pull the shot glass up to get it down like this. I saw this happen in the bar with my father, and literally he said, "Take a look over there." Now my father drank 2 quarts of scotch and 2 quarts of scotch a day and 12 beers a day, smoked 5 packs of cigarettes, never looked even buzzed. Never looked buzzed. That was his maintenance level. And he would look down on these Bowery Bums. So there was so much alcohol throughout my entire life, especially early on, that it's remarkable that I'm still here and not a severe alcoholic. So that was my experience up to the edge of Soho. The party's going to take place. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to wrap it up right there. It's 15 minutes. That was my sort of intro. I'm going to do a couple of more shows in 15-minute segments. I'm going to specifically get into Soho, and the geography of the area, what's going on there. I'm going to get into what Robert Moses wanted to do to Soho and how Jane Jacobs saved Soho. Peace, patience, persistent, and I'll see you for part 2. Get this off. Okay.